Hello, welcome today. I'm glad to have all of you joining us for the East Africa Blockchain event. And today we'll be talking about blockchain and the SDGs as well as ESG and how blockchain can be used to reach the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as well as how this can be used for ESG reporting. And we'll be going more in detail in the two areas that Dr. Adele and I have worked more on. We'll be speaking about how this can be used in supply chain tracking. This is relevant across a whole swath of different SDGs, as well as Dr. El-Masiri will be speaking about how this can be used in decentralized finance. And he, of course, will go into more detail about the specific use case of the DLN DAO, which he was one of the creators of. To give a brief introduction of ourselves, I'll start with myself, that I'm the head of the ID Foundation. I'm the founder of that, and we've been working together to bring together innovators and as a combination of think tank and virtual incubator, mainly around the area of SDG 12, around sustainable, responsible consumption and production. And Dr. Adele Masiri has been one of our advisors for that, as well as one of the mentors for some of the previous events that we've held through the foundation. And he is now a 4-time successful entrepreneur, 5-time. He's created a whole series of startups, in addition to having his PhD in machine learning. So he's both a widely published academic as well as a successful entrepreneur and practitioner in this field. And whether we're talking about machine learning, artificial intelligence, decentralized finance, blockchain, he's one of the go-to experts for this. So I'm really proud that we have him on our call today with us for this event. So I'm going to start out with a quick talk about blockchain and the SDGs, and then we'll transition from there to talking in more detail about how this relates to supply chains and how also decentralized finance relates to this, and how the systems that we're talking about in regards to how they can be used for the SDGs really weren't possible with traditional finance or traditional databases and systems. To start with, in regards to blockchain for the SDGs, it's not that blockchain is a silver bullet that can solve everything. In regards to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, what we're doing with blockchain is, of course, having that unchangeable record-keeping system. All of you are on this event because you're already interested in blockchain and have some basic knowledge. But where I see the biggest strength towards reaching the SDGs is the transparency we can bring to this. Whether this is an SDG about cooperation, whether we're looking at economic growth, whether we're looking at protecting water, life on land, life in the water, this is really the transparency and the record keeping that we have. This is what can allow everybody to be on the same page, and also to collect greater amounts of trusted data that we can use to do better analysis and make better policies. In regards to my own space, the supply chain space, one of the big problems that we've seen is in regards to SDG 12 in particular. SDG 12.3 is food loss and food waste. Last year, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization hosted its first event focused on food loss and waste, and is having events throughout this coming year focused on that. And this is because about 1/3 of food is lost from, whether it's the farm level or at the consumer level or in between, about 1/3 of everything produced is lost. And obviously a large amount of energy, of water, of effort is going into that. And there's simply still a lot of hungry people in the world. So if we can reduce that food loss, this is one of the big areas where blockchain can make an impact of tracking those supply chains. So how can we do this? How does this work? Well, if we're tracking the data about this food from farm to table, if we're tracking that whole story, we start to see where there's information or where there's stoppages in the supply chain. So a clear example of this, let's say you've got fresh fruit and produce supposed to be kept cold. It's brought to the warehouse, it sits in the truck, the refrigeration of the truck is turned off because the line is so late to unload the trucks. Simply the truck driver turns off his truck, turns off the air conditioning, the ventilation for the truck. The cold chain is not preserved. Records then aren't kept. Supermarket maybe thinks this is still fresh, everything's been kept cold. Food goes to waste or starts rotting on the shelf, or within a day or two of getting the consumer's home. That's one of the simplest ways that if we had this data collected in the blockchain, that data could automatically, through a smart device, be transmitted to the blockchain, and of what temperature the items were stored at, and then that could be continued to be saved in the blockchain in a way that nothing can be deleted, nothing can be changed. Why is this better than a traditional system? Traditional database could record all this data, but ultimately somebody controls it, and somebody can delete information, somebody can change information. And so if this is in the blockchain, this cold chain example shows us something where, the fact the cold chain wasn't preserved, nobody can hide that, nobody can delete that, nobody can change that. Now, if we zoom out from this example towards the wider set of SDGs, there's so many pieces of data that are recorded in government systems and private sector systems that ultimately somebody changes, somebody sees something that's going to cause a problem for them because maybe something was done incorrectly, and they want to change or delete that data. It's not transparent. If you look at our budgeting systems or our governments, if you look at our financial system, if we look at simple record keeping of land titles, of who owns what property, and if we're looking at things like these food supply chains, and again, just the storage of it, but who worked on it, was there any child labor involved, where was it transported, is this item that claims to be of a certain origin really from that place? There's a lot of cloudy gray areas where information isn't shared. And if one knows that when they go to the source, that this data actually could not be changed, could not be deleted, and definitively comes from this source where it says this is the person who entered it and this is where it was entered and when, this is a big area where we can root out a lot of the corruption and a lot of problems that stop us from reaching the UN SDGs. And so that's one of the big spaces of that. Dr. Dahl, give you a quick space to add to this. Any additional comments on just the blockchain use cases?
Yeah, so actually this is spot on, but there is also additional work. For example, one of my papers published on supply chains in the cotton industry. It shows that a lot of the issues that happen downstream happen because there are no transparencies in the supply chain. Example of that, in cotton industry, you not only just harvest the cotton and it becomes your end product, but actually you have to go into spinning and weaving afterwards, and they come from different cotton bales. So if there is an issue with one of those bales that get mixed together with other ones, that will cause defects in the generated spun yarn afterwards. And the bales are not all consumed in one setting or one factory, but rather they are sent through distribution to multiple different locations, multiple different spinning factories. And hence, if you look not just downstream from the supply chain, but across a section of the supply chain, you could find that the same defect is happening in multiple of those at the same time, and then they all progress downstream together, causing a huge number of losses that could be avoided. So to your point about understanding what goes on the supply chain and being able of pinpointing that, the paper talks about how can we take that information and disseminate that information in real time, and because it is immutable and we can root out malicious reporting there, we'll be able of stopping that specific batch of bales before it destroys any other good product across the chain itself, and hence helps us downstream to preserve the value, and in a manner that is beneficial for everybody playing in that ecosystem.
Great, that's a more powerful example for SDG 12 for responsible consumption and production, because not just that it's not going to waste, but it's not spreading further waste. It's preserving that value across all those parties who are part of that supply chain. Fantastic. And what I've personally been working on is the ID track system, which Dr. Masiri is giving me significant advice about as well. We basically looked at how to create something as simple as possible. Because one of the big issues is, what are the barriers to blockchain's wider use? Why is it not used more widely as a tool to reach the SDGs or in ESG reporting? And one of the challenges has just been the ease of use. Some systems are just too complicated. At least when we talk about smallhold farmers, maybe just beyond the tech that's available to them. We see wider uses of things like IBM's system, which is a really powerful system, the IBM Food Trust, but they're working more with larger producers, larger farmers, large retailers. When we talk about smallhold farmers, it's often beyond what they're able to integrate with or what they're able to use. So in our case with Addy Track, we created something that was very simple, just having 4 buttons on the screen. So it's really, once someone is signed into it, it's really simple to use. They're basically taking a picture, they're picking which batch this product is from, they're hitting send, and the date and the time and the location that entry is being made. And we're not alone, of course, in doing this. There's other organizations also reaching out to the smallhold farmers in that base of the pyramid. And I think this is one of the main tasks that across all sectors we have to look at, of how can we simplify this? How can we make this easier for more people to use? Because if it's too complicated, that's where the barrier is to regular adoption or wider adoption of blockchain.
And to your point, Peter, when we are designing systems, like as engineers and as like computer science, you are thinking about very complicated pieces, but really the use of the system is not determined by how cool it is or how advanced. It's more about how it yields itself for the weakest link, for those common people in the supply chain that are not focused on using the coolest per se technology out of the blockchain, but really using the simplest, easiest thing that helps with their daily task. If it is going to be in their way, they are not going to use it. But if it is going to help them shave minutes, help with this, help with that, it creates a huge incentive for them to use it. And then by them participating in the system, we are able of getting much better data points and much better overall utilization.
So these better data points, this helps us have a story about, say, a farmer, about a producer. And often, of course, a lot of these people are unbanked. And those data points, now we can use that for collateral, for telling the story, for seeing what history of what they've produced, maybe bringing them into the banking system. Could you maybe transition now into how decentralized finance can help make use of that data? How we can start bringing people into the financial system?
Yeah, so one of my passions over the last few years is to like really make true on the premise that blockchain allows banking the unbanked and allows a whole new financial system that exists. And really, when you look at the current banking layout, the biggest problem for banking, beside the technology that exists, is that it requires a certain amount of transactions to happen in order for it to be viable, meaning you cannot really set up a branch in the middle of nowhere and hire people there because it will not be cost effective. However, one of the biggest advantages of blockchain, it's software. It lives on the chain, it lives in your cell phone. So if you have a cell phone, you could have a banking branch in that cell phone right there, right then. So that's one. The other thing is that I'm a big fan of Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel-winning economist, micro lending. So that got me thinking around like, what are the challenges that Muhammad Yunus has introduced that are facing micro lending right now in the system? Because if you look at farmers and a lot of people in the supply chain, the biggest obstacle for them is to be able of getting enough funding for them to progress further. And Muhammad Yunus introduced the micro lending and introduced, for example, Grameen Bank and a couple other huge organizations that spun out of that. Today, it's about $150 billion industry with 100 million people using it. 82 of them are women because they're more frugal with how they have more financial responsibility. And then repayment rate. Unlike conventional loans, which is about 88%, it's 98%. But the biggest challenge to that is that you still have costs, you still have accessibility in there, you still have a sustainability issue. And because at most, when you are doing micro lending, you're helping one person, but you're not helping the whole community. So started proposing last year around kind of like, how can we pull not only resources from outside to help the community, but how can we pull each other's resources? Basically, if you think about the lending process, it's a bipolar process. it has a lender and a borrower. And in order for the lender to provide you a loan, they have to have some sort of collateral. But if you don't have a collateral to begin with, if you kind of like trying to just get an additional resources to get better crops, to get better seeds, to upgrade your current transportation method, then you are excluded out of the system. However, most of us that don't have collateral, we have friends, we have a social network around us that can help us with those. And in most areas, like I grew up in Alexandria, Egypt, so that's kind of like Northern Africa. We kind of like have a network of friends. We can go and borrow from your friends, and they will support you. But what's in it for them? So thinking about before blockchain, you could not do anything about it because if you had your friends around the country and you are trying to help each other, just transferring the money costs money. And it becomes really difficult to do all of that piece. But with blockchain, you can. So that's where DLN was incepted. The decentralized lending network creates a social staking smart contract that allows you and your friends to come together and say like, hey, Peter, would you invest in me? And you say like, yes, of course. And then you commit your resources into the DLN network, and the DLN network now tries to match that with liquidity providers that would provide liquidity for that, because now my loan is a fully collateralized loan that is kind of like risk free. So as a result of that, and using DeFi in the back end, we are able not only to provide a fee-free loan with 0%, but also to reward my investors. So Peter that trusted in me and invested in me will get rewarded with an ROI at the end of this, like the liquidity provider. How is that possible? It's because of DeFi, because the money velocity on blockchain is much faster. There are no frictions going on through the system, which helps things go much faster there and provide a much higher ROI in the system. So what I want you to think about is blockchain in DLN allows us to pull together the resources of the whole community so that it can help each other in the community itself.
Okay, so we're strengthening local communities. Now, if we take this to the next level of strengthening other institutions, like strengthening regional governments, strengthening local governments, can we integrate this with government systems? Or could, say, a regional government of a particular province or state decide they're going to create something like this or create an implementation of this for their region?
That's an excellent question. And the answer is, of course, yes. So while it is designed to work on a community level, but that's the nucleus of it, and it can grow from there. One of the biggest challenges when dealing with, for the governments to deal with situations like this is that they have limited resources. So where would they put those resources? And instead of trying to focus on one place only, if they can help focus on getting the communities to help themselves and just putting the seed in it and the inception in it, then they will unlock a lot of those resources. Because in communities across Africa, there are resources, there are people that can help each other. The only obstacle is what's in it for me, what's the incentive. And before blockchain, before DLN, there wasn't really an incentive in doing that. But with DLN, there is an incentive for those people that have some resources to help their community, because they're going to get an ROI through that. For the government point of view, instead of people having to wait on the government to come and completely help with all of those, by engaging in DLN and helping use that system, they now can expand their reach to the community. The community will start to help themselves there. One also interesting piece, we always talk about the global village, which is true. So like right now, I'm in the US, so there's a lot of people that are immigrants abroad, and they trying to help their families and friends back home. But that is very difficult if you are trying to help somebody with like $100 loan. while in order for you to send that, it will cost you $45 and 3 days. So it becomes really difficult to really take that global village and apply it in a micro lending format because of those fees. However, the blockchain using DLN remove all of the stuff. You can transfer all of those micro lending loans at like 50 cents and very small costs globally, which then allows the each local community to benefit from its members that are actually abroad, and really bringing all of that global village concept home to help with making everything better.
Now, of course, in East Africa, there's a huge diaspora that's abroad as well that would be interested in the same functionality. But so many people are using mobile money. There's things like M-Pesa. Could we talk about how does DLN complement things like that mobile money? Or why would somebody use this instead of just transferring minutes or sending minutes on the system they have already with their phones?
So
what does blockchain
I always
give us over that?
I believe in collaborations, and that systems together can build much bigger, much more impactful results. And to illustrate that, like you are absolutely true, M-Pesa and minutes are a common way of sending value around, especially in East Africa. And DLN does not help directly with it, it complements it, meaning that it organizes as a protocol, it organizes the social staking, organizing the relation between the person, the borrower, and their investors, the community around them that are trying to help them. And that then will be able of piggybacking on the M-Peso and utilization of minutes to send value through, because that would be the last mile, the on-ramp, off-ramps into the actual community. For once you've got your people to help you, how are they going to actually lock in their assets? Well, can send an M-Peso, they can send minutes into the deal, because all of that converts into crypto based blockchain assets that can be used in the system, and vice versa when it comes out the other way, similar manner there. So the way that I look at it is it's a compounding effect. It helps use the current system. One of the things that I like to always bring up as an example from my experience in Egypt, it used to take 6 months to get a landline phone in. Today, you can go in 6 minutes into the shop and just buy a SIM card, and now you have a phone line right there. And then, so utilizing those new technologies allows communities, especially developing communities, to frog leap the problems that are facing us and kind of like go to the next level.
Fantastic. And then as we think about what's being done at the local level, of what's being done with the minutes and how this can grow at a bigger level, and thinking about some of the other examples of blockchain I've seen used so far. For example, as we look at economic growth and more stability for farmers, we've seen microinsurance, where using smart contracts, the payments are made automatically based on certain triggers. Maybe smart devices in the fields detect there's not enough rainfall, so we know that the harvest is going to fail because there wasn't enough rainfall. And so, of course, the smart contracts follow that simple if-then methodology. If there's not more than 10 centimeters of rainfall, automatically pay out this amount of cryptocurrency to the farmer. And of course, this has allowed these payments to go faster for the insurance company. The farmers get their money faster. The insurance agent doesn't have to rely on a broker going out or an inspector going out to the field. There's no risk of fraud or corruption because it's just this smart device. If there wasn't rain, then of course you make the payment. And if people even try to defraud the system, if they've tried to maybe move the machine away from the plants, and if there is rain, they're trying to hide it, well, there'll be an outlier because the data is collected from all the farms in the region. And we'll see, like, why did they claim they don't have rain when everybody else did? So we have all these new integrations that can be done with the technology as well, that the smart contracts and the ability of blockchain brings in. I wonder, could actually DLN's lending network or the assets and the staking with that, could that be a next level at some point of linking microinsurance and things like that for farmers into such a system?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the beauty of trying to do a paradigm shift of moving on from the current conventional methods and really starting to integrate IoTs, like you've mentioned here, measuring devices all over the place to corroborate and provide truthful information so that when you are trying to help someone and when you are trying to provide a loan, you would know like what's going on for that in one aspect. And the other thing is we could now imagine new products that could be implemented on the system. For example, people that say like, I would like to have some sort of a backing for an insurance in case something happens. But if it doesn't, you get your money back out of that. Plus, in both cases, you get an ROI in doing that. This would be an additional build on DLN, which is a really good opportunity for me to mention that DLN is the fundamental protocol in the sense that I'm not the smartest person on the planet. I'm just trying to build the infrastructure layer. And just in the true fashion of blockchain is all about community, about coming together, building together. There are such smart people in Africa that understand how to use technologies. And not only that, but they understand how it is utilized and how it can be deployed locally, which is a critical piece. Because if for someone to try to think about it from a US perspective, for example, we do things quite differently. But in Africa, there are norms that are different and might make more sense within the local market. So they can get access to that SDK. They can start to build maybe a deal in-backed insurance, farmer insurance protocol that they can now go and deploy and sell and benefit from it locally. That is the compounding effect that helps people really grow and grow a community. And the key starts with how do you create a network? How do you create a platform that allows you to play with the community, to grow it, and to deploy it together?
Excellent. That's really great. And I'm curious if there's any. I'd like to invite the audience here to ask any questions you might have at this point. I know we've went a little bit deeper into supply chain space and into the decentralized lending spaces. There's of course other areas of other use cases of blockchain being used related to the SDGs as well. But is there any comments, any audience questions that you'd like to bring up already? One of the big things we've been looking at while I'm waiting to hear is what different UN agencies are doing. Really across the board, there's been a lot of interest because obviously the UN as they're looking at how to reach the UN SDGs, they have been investigating this, and there is a UN blockchain network. And within each organization, there's a significant amount of research that's been done. We see the World Food Program has created their Building Blocks program in Jordan, where this has been an amazing way to help refugees become integrated into the financial system, as well as to respect their dignity in the sense they've been given individual digital IDs, which scan their iris when they go to an ATM machine. And these iris scanning devices, basically mirrors that have a camera behind it, were already at the ATMs in Jordan. The Jordanian people had already started using these. So they're using a biometric ID to access a bank account created by the UN for them. But they can't actually access the banking system because they're technically refugees. They can't open a bank account in Jordan. But the UN was able to partner with one particular local bank that has accounts throughout the country to make it so refugees can access the funds that come to them through the blockchain and withdraw the money in Jordanian dinar. So far as displaced people and refugees having access to finance and at the same time increasing efficiencies, this has been powerful. The increased efficiencies come from the fact that the UN used to actually issue debit cards to people or give cash payments to people. There's risk of either the cash being lost, the debit card being misplaced, or someone stealing it. And of course, the cost the UN agencies had of either securing a location that would be giving away cash or of paying 3% per transaction to the credit card processing companies or debit card processing companies. And this is something where the UN has reduced its costs significantly. The refugees who are receiving the funds are feeling simply much more like normal people because they're not using something different than other Jordanian people are using. And also reduces the risk of them being robbed. Because if you're coming away from an office where everybody knows that that's where the refugees go to get their payments, that's a risk of being targeted. Whereas if it's something like you're just going to a normal ATM that everybody else goes to as well, you don't have that risk. You don't have that concern because that's a regular ATM that everyone's going to. So that's a simple example, something that as a program the UN World Food Program created in this case, and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees worked closely with. But there's also been pilots like UNDP was tracking the Kashmir supply chain in Mongolia as a pilot. UN Food and Agriculture Organization is now looking at has looked at mangoes in South America. They've done a successful project in Vietnam with pork. There's been a lot of projects where we're looking at the supply chain tracking issue, but also increasingly starting to look at public finance, of budgeting. How can we create transparent budgeting systems? How can we make it very clear to people and strengthen those institutions, strengthen those government institutions by showing where the money is coming from, where the money is going, and again, the fact that it can't be deleted, that it's all transparent, is what is the exciting aspect, that nobody can hide it. If there's something where maybe traditionally would have been paying money to a family member or some partner company or somebody they know, the records and the tracking of those transactions are all there. And so it makes where some people have made accusations of Bitcoin and other payment systems being used by criminals in the past. Now it's actually, now that people know how to track it and know how to investigate this, it's much more transparent than traditional financial systems have been. So this creates new opportunities as well to reduce corruption and to increase efficiencies in that regard too.
Yeah, you bring a lot of really good points here, Peter, and especially regarding Jordan. So DLN is working with an organization over there called Quest Scope that deals with like 2 million refugees in camps, and the whole concept of trying to bring them ideas and to bring them financial outlook is a really relevant one, where you are trying to move them from being a cost center. Because think about it, if they want to, if you are a refugee and you are trying to create a business, you cannot really rely on any traditional funding. If you don't have any money, don't have any assets, who's going to help you? No one. You are outside, you're excluded from the financial system. But if you can go to deal and basically say, hey, I need to do this project, here is what I'm trying to do, and then your friends and family, not only locally in the camp, but across the globe. Some of them might be in Germany, some of them might be in the US. They can come in together and fund your back your proposal on the system, become an investor in you in there, which then matches with the funds that the UN is putting, and then goes through the iris biometric devices that allow you to actually get the cash on the ground in Jordan, which then helps move you from a cost center being dependent on people's charity to bring support to you, to becoming an active productive member of the community that actually producing and adding to the local economy as well. So it does not only help you as a refugee, it helps the community that is hosting you in there, and benefits the system, benefits also the people that are supporting you, because all of them will get an ROI from deal in just for supporting you there. All of those allow you to really expand what exists today by putting it on a network that is transparent, that is immutable, and accessible from across the globe. If you remember, like when we had hurricanes come and strike Haiti and strike other places here in this side of the hemisphere, the campaigns that spun up with phone text messages were much more effective than traditional campaigns. Why? Because they piggybacked on telecom networks, allowed the funds to really reach the people in need right there and then. Blockchain only emphasizes that and expands on it. Like if there is a crisis going on right now and people across the globe understand what's going on, they can immediately react and be very effective in implementing it. That's the power of becoming a really global community to work with.
I can see that the globalization of the community of being able to transfer funds instantly, to transfer resources instantly, maybe also to more transparently see the needs of what requests communities have. And as well, there's been projects in regards to reducing corruption about making more transparency of where the funds are going and what the money is being used for. There's a Swedish organization, ls.si. They actually create a system where they use their smart contracts to time the disbursements. So if a small donor, if you or I as an individual decide, I want to donate money to a particular cause, and I don't have a monitoring and evaluation capability that a big organization may have, I can go and set, these are my benchmarks, and once these benchmarks are hit, the second, third, fourth tranche of the funds will be dispersed. And that brings it to the level of individuals being able to set up smart contracts in a way that big development organizations would normally have done, of having people on the ground who would go and be monitoring the project. So there's a lot of new technology, new tools. I see a question we have here. Agriculture being a very politicized economy, transparency may not be encouraged. What kind of policy enforcement from the UN FAO should be enforced, especially in the African economy, to endorse transparency in the agroeconomy? I would say one of the aspects that, from my perspective, that may change this isn't so much from the UN agencies, but rather from the demand side of where this food is going to. Obviously, so much of that food is consumed domestically, but a lot of it is exported. And we're seeing increased demands for digital transparency in food supply chains. For example, more and more European consumers want to know the whole history of where their food came from. That's where my other system, IID Track, has had a lot of use cases, because simply European consumers want to know where their food came from, or in the case of textiles, want to know who worked on it, where the cotton came from, how was it processed. And so that full storytelling and the digital transparency probably won't come from the local level, at least in some cases. It may come more because consumers demand it. It can also be local consumers demanding it. But I do see as a regulatory issue that some regulations of European governments are starting to require this for their imports. Some European consumers are showing with their pocketbooks they're willing to pay a higher price going to more expensive stores and buying more expensive products if they have this transparency with them. I see as well that in China, this blockchain transparency has been used in their aspect of food safety. I've been able to trace and recall supply chains, and so that's been an important case as well. So I see that mix of market drive or the governments of those countries where one is exporting to. So it's overall still a market-driven perspective. I do see that local governments could encourage this, though, by either one, looking at how to reduce waste themselves and looking at how that could benefit having a more efficient supply chain, maybe even more tax revenue coming from that. In parallel, I do know that in some regions and some countries, of course, that transparency may not be wanted because somebody's making extra money. And there may be some corruption in some spaces. And that's not specific to Africa. That's globally. That's everywhere with the food supply chains. And there, I think that's where the force of government and those regulations do come in, saying this is mandated, and that's at the local level it can be done. But again, these private forces, even if they are making money on the side in some way, they may see that, oh, if I want to sell to that other market, if I want to export to that place, I need this transparency because now this is required, or now this is what consumers either domestically or in these foreign markets are demanding, and they'll start providing that transparency.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off your last comment here and say that usually there are two ways of making things happen, either by mandating and basically putting punishing regulations for those that don't have, so basically going on the negative, or there is the positive reinforcement method. And in a global economy where everybody knows what where everything is coming from, like for example being tracked by the IAD system, there the incentive for the consumer to recognize that, to get maybe additional things that they can show that they are conscious connoisseurs of all of that, to show their friends that yes, I bought all of my purchases, or 90% of my purchases are verified in the stores, creates a social movement that helps kind of like reward people socially in that, and at the same time by kind of like putting the demand from a capital point of view on those that are products that have been consciously and socially produced in there, puts an incentive even if there is some sort of corruption within the system, because at the end of the day the person wants to make more money. If they can make it more money by doing it more consciously and more responsible, they will pick that. So we would make the cost and the benefit analysis of it much better.
Go to that next question that came up about WTO. If the WTO could make rules about this, and if the WTO could make rules specific towards promoting this transparency, that first off, I'll preface by saying I'm not an expert on the WTO rules. However, I don't see that as likely an area that they could do. The reason for this is the WTO is looking at reducing subsidies, making sure quotas are done in a fair manner, reducing barriers to trade, and if a producing in contrast, the WTO I could see as more likely to make the action of saying maybe Germany's requirement of digitalization of agricultural supply chains is unfair for African farmers, and trying to strike down that regulation, because that digitalization requirement could be viewed as more of a protection or a protective requirement, because maybe they're saying, okay, well, the German farmers are able to digitalize, that's protecting the local market. Maybe that's actually hurting foreign markets. Maybe that's a barrier to trade that in this case Germany may be making by requiring digital traceability of supply chains. Whereas in contrast, someone locally just saying, we don't want to create this rule, we don't want to force our companies to do this, that lack of enforcement, or that lack of requiring something new of the farmers, the producers, I think is something that the WTO would be less likely to be engaged in. Again, the WTO rules aren't my core area of expertise, so I'd welcome other comments or other suggestions about that space, but I see that as less likely as something that the WTO would step in and mandate that transparency be created. Whether it's something that countries could choose to do that if they want to reach higher end markets or higher end consumers, or if their own markets start demanding it. From talking to, for example, an agritech consulting firm that we're partnered with in Nigeria, they've pointed out that transparency actually would be in a big demand with some of the high-end markets in Lagos. Maybe not everybody could afford to pay extra, of course, but for those who are at the higher end of the economy, they could and would have an interest in paying more for high quality. And so it's not only European markets, it's also your higher end consumers within Africa who can start creating this demand for this traceability.
You're absolutely right. And the point is that in a global economy, it's more of the community that needs to take action. The community needs to step up and vote with their wallets, whether they are digital or actual fiat wallets, to make change happen. So that change, that community action is only emphasized by using blockchain to help bring the transparency, to help create systems that were not possible before. And that's where we can all help and participate.
And the question that I saw come up next about SDG-driven seed funds, that I think that's outside of the venue of what we're talking about here. Because again, yes, you could have an ICO, you could use blockchain to raise funds for a particular project or a particular task you're trying to do. However, there is UN funds available in various ways, but the UN doesn't engage at that micro level with the private sector of investing in individual startups. There are things in the food space, for example, like the World Food Program has its accelerator program, but that's far beyond the seed stage. That's when your company is already fairly well established, already has revenue, already has traction, maybe has been running for 2 or 3 years. So rather that seed stage investor, there you're normally going to be looking locally. As I say, looking locally as well, because most seed stage investors, that's going just beyond your friends and family, and that's usually where that seed stage And even the early venture capital stage investor, they typically invest within 50 or 100 kilometers of where they live. They want to be able to see that project, to see you up front, to see you in person, to see the progress of what's happening. And so that's yes, there may be international seed funds available, but if you're talking about seed stage investment, an angel investor, that's usually at the local level. That's usually people in your own community, in your own country, who are going to be looking at for that.
And if I may add as well, that's why DLN as a network is created to bring your social network. We call it social smart contract because there is a social contract between you and your friends and family that enables both your responsibility to repay, to make true on your promises, and also removes this layer of having to hire people to make sure that you are doing what you're saying you are doing and monitor your actions because you are socially responsible to your friends and family network. That's what makes this work as a community.
What other questions do we have here? Again, to reiterate, while we're waiting, to reiterate, the main point is that blockchain is a tool that can move us towards the SDGs, but by itself, it's just a tool to be getting us towards there, right? The bigger change in reaching the SDGs is really that social change of getting people to make the right policies towards this. So if we talk about reducing corruption, for example, blockchain can create the transparency that roots out or makes it more difficult to have corruption. But first, you have to have a government or an organization that's willing to adopt the technology. If you have a local government where the people are saying there's local corruption, we want to have the budget be in the blockchain so we know it can't be changed and we see all the payments being tracked, there's ways even to do that in a simple and cost-effective enough way that can be implemented even at the local government level. It's not out of reach and beyond costs anymore, but first you need that local government to be willing to put their data onto the blockchain. So the tech side is becoming simpler and simpler, and a lot of the most cutting edge things aren't what we necessarily even need right now. Even things from 2-3 years ago of just sharing the data, having it be there, having it be unchangeable, is already enough to make a major impact. The bigger challenge in using blockchain to reach the SDGs is one, convincing people to be on board with it, and two, prior to that, of course, thinking through the use cases. What data are we recording? What data is important that will help us reach the SDGs? Why is it important for this to be transparent? And understanding as well what tools like the smart contracts or new ways of tying social networks together like DLN DAO does, how this can be used in new ways. Thinking through these new use cases, thinking through these new uses of the technology, that's the other part that's more complicated. So one, thinking through those new use cases, and two, getting governments and getting communities on board, getting people to understand it. That's again the ID track. We made something just as simple as possible. The idea that we want to make it as simple as possible to get people on board. With DLN DAO, it's looking at how do you make use of the social networks you're already part of, so you're not introducing something entirely new. But these are the bigger challenges than the tech side of it. And the tech side, yes, in many cases, making user interface that's simpler is important. Of demystifying the idea of blockchains, so people understand it better, is important. But these are usually the easier things to get around than the more complicated side, just convincing people and organizations to be using this.
So this is a really good point that I wanted to just expand on a little bit. So an example of like how you start to change your mind once you understand the power of blockchain, understand the power of tracking like in IAD or DLN as a network, is to start combining those with new things. An example of that would be students. So we all know that we have families with students, and sometimes they go to college, they need expenses, and it's really hard. But if you could create a company, a project of your own, not DLN itself, but built on top of DLN that backs the students in Africa and say like, okay, if you're a student, we can get your friends and family to help you with your student tuitions, and then marry that with something from the UN educational programs over there, then that becomes a really new, interesting product that and possibility that can be built using an infrastructure, or thinking through how can we utilize tracked garments that are going through the IAD organization to basically get better support for expanding those operations. So now you are taking the building blocks of the IAD Foundation and DLN, putting them together, mixing with your own flavor in your own local customization to build something new that did not exist before. And that's the ingenious that we are looking for.
Yeah, and we're continuously looking for new partners who want to work with us in building new tools that accompany what we're doing and building on our systems. I'm also happy to talk to anyone who's interested in these pilots or helping learn how to develop and how to build something on top of this. Now, so far as the question that was asked about, are there any systems that are utilized already? Are there things that are beyond the pilot phase? Yes, there are many. So if we talk about transparency, it ranges from agriculture projects like we've been talking about. There's projects in that regard with Ghana, with coffee, with cacao. There's some in Latin America, some are in Africa. There's, at this point, actually hundreds of projects listed on a website called positiveblockchain.io. That's one of the partners of the IAD Foundation. There you can find a database of literally hundreds of projects. Yes, some of them are pilots, but many of them are fully implemented. This transparency has also been promoted through supply chains since 2016 already by by IBM Food Trust. That started out with Walmart and with Carrefour and other big retailers with the idea of tracing food for food safety and food recalls. We also have beyond that cases like when we talk about transparency in the public sector. Surprisingly, at first surprising to me at least, this has been more in Latin America we've seen this, but the government of Cordoba, Argentina, they decided they were going to put their entire system of bidding onto the blockchain, of bidding for public procurement in the arts sector. So they say the bidding announcement is on there already, then they have who's on the short list, and then they have who was awarded, when the funds are dispersed. And because previously that was something where it may have been family members of government officials who were getting the funds. And so now that's all fully transparent. Bahia Blanca, Argentina, they also put up a case where they put their entire public sector budget onto the blockchain. They didn't track each individual transaction, but at the start of the year, they would say, here's the budget for the city itself and for the main utility companies, which were state-owned. And by recording it there, if later on there came to be a question about it or someone wanted to verify what was really spent versus what was in the budget, you couldn't go back and change the budget numbers anymore. You couldn't hide them. You couldn't have that file mysteriously be hidden or not found. Now people really could compare what was spent with what was planned to be spent. And yes, of course, the government did sometimes spend differently than was planned, but at least now the public and watchdog groups could go back and look at that and see what happened, and the government would have to explain why it made a different spending plan than they intended.
And that makes the cost of hiding things much more than the cost of doing them the right way, which is
Yes.
the helpful piece. It's like open market economies really work if we use them the right way.
Definitely. In the carbon credit space, there hasn't been a lot done in that space yet. There's a lot of opportunity, though. I believe Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream had actually built something where they were tracking carbon credits using the Stellar blockchain. I haven't looked a lot in detail into that use case recently. I know there's a lot of organizations that have been exploring this, but it hasn't been well developed yet. The reason I say that this is a great opportunity and a great space to look at is because blockchain really clearly can look at a specific asset and how you're tracking an asset and who owns the asset. So if all of a sudden you assign each of these carbon credits as an individual asset, it becomes much more fluid and fast to trade, just like how we spoke about how DLN DAO more easily makes those money transfers take place. Those money transfers aren't fiat currency. That's cryptocurrency being transferred and, of course, can be converted to fiat currency. But those tokens can just instantly be transferred without borders, without thoughts of that. In the same way, if we have a registry of all the carbon credits, and we can easily and clearly say, okay, this company owns this many carbon credits, and you want to trade them and have a marketplace for trading them. Again, it's decentralized. You don't need a direct marketplace anymore. You can just know the address of who you're selling those credits to, and you can instantly be transferring those credits over. So if an organization needed more carbon credits because they are polluting more, or if they're greener, they have excess credits available, it's much more easy to trace and to track and to send those credits than it was previously. I say to track as well, because again, those would be listed and could be listed in a public blockchain database. And that way any watchdog groups could go look, and if they knew the digital ID of each of these companies, be able to watch and see what amount of credits they used and compare them and see if they're buying or selling credits and what activity they're doing.
Yeah, transparency can be your friend as well.
Definitely. Not all government officials feel that way, but they can be, yes. All right. Do we think digital currency or cryptocurrency adopted to trade globally, especially in Africa? What do you think of the Chinese digital currency taking off as a primary trade vehicle? Well, first, I'm curious to see if it does take off as a primary trade vehicle. Of course, it's been announced, and I think that'll be very interesting to see how that competes with the US dollar and how quickly people will accept it or not. I think that'll be a very, very powerful use case. One of the big advantages is simply any digital money, whether it's the Chinese digital currency or another, it's fluid, it moves fast, it moves quickly. It's again like the DL and DAO example, you can make those transfer payments instantly. You're not waiting 3 to 6 days for money to transfer. You're not paying these massive fees that you were paying previously. So the fluidity of money across borders increases significantly, whether it's the Chinese-backed cryptocurrency, whether it's another one. The question as well of if there would be one created that's specifically for Africa, well, once you've created one that's meant for all of Africa, it may as well be global, right? Because if we've created a currency that's meant for 53 countries to share, then we may as well make it something global. The main barrier I see in that regard, whether there's a global currency, whether there's a regional currency, is what local central banks will say in regards to it. I know even within East Africa, there's very different reactions to cryptocurrency from one country to another. Some countries are more in favor and accepting, some not. I've heard of great blockchain pilots happening in Uganda, for example, but not every country in the region is willing to accept it and willing to allow these things to take place because, of course, the two main powers of the state are the armed force of having its military, having the police forces, and being the creators of money, managing their currency. So many countries, of course, have pegged their currency to another one and have lost that ability in that sense. Obviously, so many countries have the CFA franc in West Africa, especially, and so they're pegged to the euro. But that monetary control, a lot of central banks, will be difficult to get them to give up that monetary control, and I think that will be a big challenge. If you were to create an African currency, an African cryptocurrency, would it be decentralized where there's no central authority controlling it? Or would there be maybe a coalition of African central banks that votes and decides together what are the regulatory issues? And in that case, there's such different economic conditions and political conditions in different countries throughout the continent. You'd see similar problems to what the European Union is having with the euro, where maybe Germany's economy is booming and they want to raise interest rates, but Italy and Spain's economies are doing bad. They want the opposite interest rate policy. It would be a coordination issue if you had one cryptocurrency that was meant for the entire continent. The UK's relation to their BRIC currency, I have heard rumors about that. I haven't heard that as a definite thing yet. I would be curious to see if the Brits would actually be the winner. I'm a bit critical of Brexit and a lot of their policies recently, so I don't know if I would think that they're going to be the winner in this race. I mean, at least so far as being biggest global traders, the biggest global markets. If you're going to pick between trading with China or trading with Britain, definitely China's the bigger market, so that gives an incentive towards their currency. If they get all the Commonwealth countries to accept it, that would be a big difference, though. Again, though, it comes down to what will their trading partners accept, and will central banks, the countries they're operating with, also accept this? Or will they each create their own cryptocurrencies and we're actually just transferring back and forth in a digital space from one currency to another. And in that case, we're losing a lot of the benefits that we had of the decentralization that cryptocurrencies bring. I am happy to take other comments further on or messages. If for those who are interested and have follow-up questions for either of us, you can go to the addyfoundation.org, and there's a space for comments or contact us there, and we can get back with you afterwards. It's been a pleasure to take your questions today, and it's a really broad topic, talking about the SDGs, and we haven't even touched upon economic and social governance reporting and how this impacts that. So it's a huge topic. Sorry we didn't go into cover all the broad array of things that are here, but I welcome any questions people would like to send afterwards.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on.